Can we finally admit the SEC was grossly overrated? And if the Big 12 got 14 teams into March Madness, 7 of them would have made the Sweet 16? That's just math. This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. We will start with the Big 12 being really good, from BYU to Arizona to Houston and Texas Tech, and the SEC overrated. I'm not arguing Auburn's bad. I'm just arguing Texas, Oklahoma. Why were they in March? I wish we would have gotten 14 teams in. That would have been fair. And then middle segment, BYU, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. How that combination is making that athletics program a juggernaut. I will explain, and I hope you agree. And then Florida State and Clemson leaving the ACC this July. At least they'll announce it then. That's what one source is telling us. Is that real, though? TJ Pittenger of College Football Addiction is going to join the show today with a Locked On Big 12 crossover. And, oh, by the way, if you hit subscribe, I get to keep my job. Why am I delaying this? TJ, what do we got?
Drake, a conference that certainly got all of the shine, and we'll give them a little bit here, I'm sure, when we do this, was the SEC, but the Big 12 maybe having the best first weekend of the tournament to start things off.
Well, it just so happens that big, mighty SEC that was historically good in college basketball this year might not be as mighty as we expected. Now, good, sure, they're still very solid. Auburn and Florida could win national championships this year, but the SEC, third behind the Big 12 and the Big 10 in winning percentage this March. The Big 12 is 10-3 overall, sending schools like BYU to the Sweet 16, which was unexpected. You could argue that Arkansas going to the Sweet 16 was unexpected, but let me remind you, TJ, and everybody else listening, their head coach is John Calipari, right? If you hire John Wooden, if you hire Rick Pitino to be your head coach, if you hire some of these legends, Jay Wright, then going to the Sweet 16 is just kind of expected and normal. That's what those guys do. Kevin Young is a first-year head coach in college basketball, and the Big 12 at a 77% win percentage, 10-3 overall. The Big 10 at 75% at 12-4. They've also showcased, I think the Big 10 has showcased, they are deeper than the SEC, better than the SEC, and yeah, the Southeast Conference has 7 teams in the Sweet 16. That's what happens when you allow the entire league to be there, despite schools that were 6-12 in conference play. Almost telling Big 12 schools or Big 10 schools, hey, play as few conference games as you want. The committee is not going to count your conference record. They're only going to count net. So what happened is the SEC had a really good non-conference. I'll give them their flowers there. But when you get into conference play after that, you can only beat each other. So then really what we have to go off of are your non-conference streaks, like how you did in non-conference. So if everybody does well, Oklahoma namely, does well in non-con, you go into conference play, and no matter who loses, somebody else won, and that's ultimately going to help them. I look at a Vanderbilt, or again, Oklahoma or Texas. The couple wins that they got helped them get into March because they were beating other SEC schools, and that loss that may have been taken by Mississippi State didn't hurt them, didn't hurt the SEC, I should say, because it was a win for Texas. So it's this inception of college basketball that made the SEC so overblown this year. And part of that, I'm going to go back to the 4 letters, is this ESPN machine that only wants to build up that conference. Again, if you and I had invested in Home Depot, we want Home Depot to succeed. We want Home Depot to win. That's our goal here. The SEC wants the ESPN wants the SEC to win because they have so much money invested in it. So if we spend the entire season talking about how historically good the SEC is, and Joe Lunardi puts the SEC 10, 12, 14 teams in his bracket every week, from there, we can turn national attention to the league. We can make this national perception that the league is elite, historically good, and then 14 teams get in. That is silly and just shows how major media outlets can control what happens in postseasons. And if you disagree with that, you probably wouldn't disagree about the college football playoff, right? So why would you disagree with the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I think there's so many different interesting angles, and I think you can preface things like by saying, like, I can undoubtedly say that I thought the SEC had more really good teams in it, and I think that played itself out, right? 7 teams, and it's most of their higher ranked seeds. You know, I think we all kind of can say,
right? It's the high ranked seeds and John Calipari. So
right, yeah. I think we can all, it hurts my heart to say that, like, Florida's a really good team. Auburn, really good team. Alabama, we'll talk about BYU here in a minute. Alabama, really good team. You know, I think, you look at teams like Kentucky and Tennessee and you think, like, yeah, these are teams that would be really good. And I don't think a lot of people beat their chest. I was one of them after the first round saying, look, the SEC, they barely over 500. Sure. And what ended up playing itself out, Drake, outside of Calipari and maybe a couple of exceptions, the really good SEC teams that I think everyone agreed should be in. Nobody was fighting whether or not Auburn or Florida should be 1 seeds. We all kind of agreed with that. It was the teams that we didn't think really measured up that all lost. Outside of Cal, they all lost. And that was where people, so your SEC haters, me, right, on Twitter are dunking on the SEC. And now we get to the second weekend and everybody in the SEC is saying, well, you spoke too soon. And I don't think so. I think the SEC, the ones that wanted to kind of go against the grain, that weren't in love with the SEC getting their whole league in, basically were saying, man, you left West Virginia out for these teams that had 6-10 records or just awful records in conference. That was our point, was that they were going to go to the NCAA tournament and not prove themselves, which none of them outside of Coach Cal's team did. They're not going to go in the NCAA tournament and prove themselves. They're all just going to lose first round and basically prove the haters wrong or prove the haters right. And the SEC folks have now turned it on the other side and saying, well, see how good the SEC really was. No one doubted that the 7 teams that are in the Sweet 16, with the exception again of Arkansas, maybe, nobody really doubted that those top 6 should have been in or that those top 6 would go far. Listen, I expect most of the SEC teams, most of the 7 that are in, I think most of them win in the next round, right? Now, am I saying that all 7 win or 6 of the 7 win? Maybe not, but I expect Florida to win. I expect Auburn to win. I think Bama's got a challenging matchup with BYU, but it's not going to shock anybody if a 5 or 6 point favorite in Bama wins in the next round. I think Tennessee likely wins in the next round. So yeah, they're probably going to put 4 or so, maybe even 5 teams into the Elite 8. And then they will beat their chest and say, yeah, see, we told you the SEC was so good. Nobody argued that the SEC wasn't good. We argued that the 13th team in a conference probably didn't need to be in March Madness just because they were in said conference. I know that I've been going for a while, so I'll get your take on this. But the other thing that I'll tell you is we gave the SEC a crap ton of credit for their out of conference record. I think that as a season goes on and you see how historically bad some of those out of conference wins were, like they beat their chest back in November about how they dominated the ACC. Is that really impressive right now? Like, as an ACC guy, unfortunately, as an ACC guy, like, is that an impressive thing? Like, was it impressive to beat all these crappy ACCs? One ACC school made it out of the first round, right? And so I just think that, yeah, you had a good out of conference record. What does that really mean right now, right? And you look at some of the strength of schedules, the out of conference strength of schedules. There's not an SEC team that has a strength of schedule in the top 100 out of conference. And so, they did well out of conference, but so what? I just don't know how impressive that truly is. So yes, the SEC is very good. I think unless it's Duke, maybe Houston, the SEC will probably lift up the trophy at the end of the year. And no one's denying that. However, our argument always was the bottom of the league had no right to be in the tournament, and that proved itself out.
Yeah, had Oklahoma missed the tournament, had Texas missed the tournament, had even a Mississippi State then left off the table here, none of us would have complained. Those schools weren't going to make a run anyway. And this is a year that is very top heavy in general. Duke is not an SEC team. They are still one of the best schools in the country. Houston, not an SEC team. Who plays Purdue, who's not an SEC team. Or Maryland, the Crab Five, right? Michigan State. Those are teams that could all make Final Four runs this year that aren't in the SEC, and they all deserve to be in March Madness because it's just a top-heavy year in college basketball. It's not that the SEC is this world-beating generational league. It's the fact that really good talent will go to the top now. We're not going to see as many upsets. Reason being, the best player on St. Peter's, the best player at Longwood is going to leave to play for Houston or Michigan or Auburn or Maryland. And that's what's happening right now. It's just top heavy. Whoever has the most money is going to succeed. And that's going to continue to fester in college basketball and college football the longer our NIL is treated the way that it is. So as we sit, the SEC isn't this wild, crazy monster. No, it's 6, 7 really good basketball teams. And the Big 12 is 6, 7 really good. And the Big 10 is 6, 7 really good basketball teams. And you put in 12, 13, 14 schools from each of those conferences, yeah, they'll get 7 to the Sweet 16. At some point, there's like math to this, right? The odds are way higher for those leagues. So you're not looking at an SEC that's going to go down in the record books as the greatest conference of all time. You're seeing really good teams at the top, and just like the rest of college basketball, whereas Texas, Oklahoma could have been left at home and nothing would have changed.
Yeah, the math eventually does work itself out.
Yeah.
If we put 13 Big 12 teams in next year, I would imagine that we will get a very large number of Big 12 teams into the Sweet 16 as well.
Today's show is brought to you by SupplyHouse. SupplyHouse is spectacular for me as someone who just bought their first house. It's a fixer-upper. I need a whole lot of stuff. If you need supplies, HVAC, plumbing, electrical work, SupplyHouse is the reliable way to order products online. Easy-to-use website, and it delivers so fast, coast to coast. Inventory of over 200,000 parts. I go to a local national branded department store here, and they don't have what I need. SupplyHouse, they do, and they deliver it, again, fast. Need help with an order? SupplyHouse offers expert support for trade pros looking for an extra edge. Free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks, dedicated phone line, free shipping, discounts on every order. It's your turn to follow thousands of skilled professionals. Join the Trade Master program at supplyhouse.com/TM. Start ordering plumbing, HVAC, electrical supplies with a few clicks. Use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Go to supplyhouse.com.
Drake, does it surprise you at all that we're talking about BYU right now in the Sweet 16?
Me? Does this surprise me, DJ? Is that a real question that you're asking? You know,
I gave you a softball. Not quite a banana ball, but a softball.
I have learned if there's one school, one team I'm not going to doubt in March Madness or in football or at this point in really anything, it's BYU because of the newfound commitment that they've made to athletics. I say newfound. That might tick off some BYU fans like, oh, what do you mean newfound? Not necessarily something that BYU hasn't cared about. It's not like they've been lackadaisical about athletics, but now it's, hey, what if we put a whole lot of money into basketball, into football, into winning, into the transfer portal? What if instead of getting the 2-star kid from Logan or the 3-star kid from Orem, who will be really good in 4 years, we pony up NIL and we go get the greatest international player in the country, bring him to play for us, give him $1 million, and win. Now, a big piece of this too, TJ, that I continue to bring up because people need to understand the reason I tout BYU so much is because of the growth they can continue to keep up with that Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints moniker. The fact that they're so committed to that faith committed to them as the flagship university of the LDS Church is great for BYU because you have an international fan base. And the more that BYU wins, the more those 3 letters are promoted. The more the name Brigham Young is promoted, the more that an entire faith is promoted, the more that Notre Dame wins, the more the Catholic faith is promoted. People are like, oh yeah, the Catholic school is in the national championship or making a deep run. That's how you can use athletics as a format to spread something larger or a message. That's what BYU is doing. What if we invest in basketball? What if we invest in football and those 3 letters grow even larger and the faith can expand? This isn't just like Alabama winning to win, winning to appease donors, donating money to see the school put up W's. No, this is an entire faith built around a university, I should say, built around a faith in an athletic department that recognizes that and now wants to invest insane amounts of money here. So I'm not shocked that BYU's here based on the way they built their roster, based on Kevin Young being their head coach. And if one man in this world had BYU going to the Sweet 16, it was me. And I have touted that for weeks on end now. Here they are. They've made it, and the analytics love BYU, even against Alabama.
So I want to ask you about that Bama game and some matchups and thoughts there. But we took care of business first round against VCU, and then in the second round, absolutely. I think this tournament, not to crap on the tournament at all, because because college basketball right now is becoming so top heavy. We didn't get a lot of upsets. We didn't get a lot of buzzer beaters. We got one last night in the game, and then the Florida UConn game was good. But this of the second round, when you look at the games, this Wisconsin BYU game was really, really good, and really kind of one of the classics of the tournament so far, in a tournament that I do think has largely been underwhelming. I asked, I knew you weren't going to be surprised, but what has BYU done to put themselves in this position on the court, specifically in that second round game against Wisconsin?
Yeah, they played really clutch basketball and really good defense. Now, the clutch part, you're probably hearing that and going, oh, they play clutch basketball. It's what they say about everybody who makes the Sweet 16. But to an extent, that's true. You look at the Wisconsin game. BYU let Wisconsin right back in there. The referees gave the Badgers some help. The VCU game, VCU pulled it within single digits in the second half. And you thought, oh, shoot, is BYU going to crap this game away? And it's tough to say when you're up 20 points, 15 points, and the opposing team pulls it within a couple of buckets that you're playing your best basketball or playing clutch basketball. But when the clutch factor really matters is once it's gotten to single digits and you still win that game. Once the momentum has swung the other way and you still win that game. BYU doesn't look pretty. They don't look good. They are a very good momentum team. They're one of the least consistent teams in college basketball. They will go on a run of their own, a 23-8 run, and then give you your own 23-8 run. So finding a way to win these games, finding that clutch gene in the last 2 minutes, in the last 30 seconds is how BYU has gotten here, along with the number 7 defense in America per shot quality. Now, there are NBA coaches who pay shot quality to run their advanced analytics. And if you ask that site, they'd say BYU is 7th in America on that side of the ball. Many people threw away the BYU defense. Last year, it wasn't that great. They were a little bit more live and die by the 3. But this is a BYU squad this year that has settled in offensively, number 11 in the nation, and defensively, they are just elite. If you're top 10 in the country, you are elite. And while that side doesn't get a lot of flowers, it should. BYU has made it here off of really good basketball in that last 2 minutes of the game, and insanely good defense.
They'll certainly have their hands full. You mentioned the Bama game coming up. Mark Sears, one of the best players in the entire country, took away several awards in the SEC and then nationally. A kid that when I would tune in and watch him this year seemed to make every big shot and really was the catalyst that really gets that team going. How do you think they, not only him, but just a pretty talented Bama team that again we talked about the SEC earlier, but a talented Bama team that had some pretty impressive wins this year, had some nice things that they've been able to do. Just thoughts on how they match up with Sears specifically, and also with Alabama in totality.
Yeah, I don't hate this matchup at all for BYU because of how finicky Alabama looked against St. Mary's and even against Robert Morris in that first round game. Bama could have easily lost each of those if not for runs of their own. They're late within 10 minutes to go in the game. Like St. Mary's pulls it within single digits and they keep hanging around. Robert Morris pulls it within single digits and they keep hanging around. Alabama has not impressed me really whatsoever in March to this point. And as good as they were in the regular season, I just don't know if I can trust their defense. And in March, that is what is so key to keep yourself in the big dance. They allowed 81 points to that Robert Morris team that you thought they could absolutely blow them out. For Alabama this year, their offense is 4th in the country. Their defense 81st in America per shot quality. That's a massive advantage for BYU. On a neutral court, this is a BYU win per shot quality by 1 point. Now, that's still a 6 seed over a 2 seed, a major upset over an SEC team, but when the advanced analytics like it, I like it a lot. What's going to hurt BYU in this game, and I'm going to bring this up now, and the deeper they get in the tournament, it's really going to become a factor, is their inability to get to the free throw line and make free throws. They're 253rd in America this year in drawing fouls. They don't get fouled a lot. When they do, they don't always make their free throws. They were much better against Wisconsin, despite some disparity with the officiating crew. But then again, BYU doesn't really foul other teams. Most of the games they play, based on the numbers, don't send either to the line very much. So that's an interesting thing to pay attention to here. If BYU and Alabama play a clean game where the officials let them go, this is a BYU win, no doubt. If Bama shoots 12 more free throws, that's when things get dicey. But again, BYU number 8 in America defensively, number 11 offensively. For Alabama, they're number 81 defensively, and they're number 4 offensively. So that's a really weird little lopsided thing to play around with.
Any news by saying that certainly starting well is a big deal. Watching Bama, you mentioned all of March, watching Bama against Florida in the SEC tournament, Florida got out to a pretty good lead. And by, right after halftime, Florida got up kind of insurmountable and then just kind of coasted the rest of the way. And in a lot of Alabama's wins, they've gotten up big and not, defense. They just have kept scoring, right? Best defense is a good offense that kind of keeps the ball going through the net, and the other team doesn't have a chance to come back. With a defense that struggles, it's kind of the same thing for BYU. If they can get up on Bama, and it doesn't, any team gets up by 10 or 12 points. Again, I'm not breaking news by telling you that, but with a defense that is a little bit better, with a Bama defense that struggles to slow people down, if you get up and have more talent than a Bob Morris, right, who certainly took them to the absolute wire, if you have a little more talent than them, right, you're a 6 seed, right, not an unexpected 15. I do think that's where BYU can really have a lot of success. Alabama's offense, though, really good. And that's where if BYU starts to trail, can they get enough stops to get back into a game? I think this is going to be a classic. I think this is going to be one that's a ton of fun. Do you have an X factor for BYU in this game?
Yeah, Kibikeda is really underrated for what he's been able to do. Yegor Demon is a massive name for them. Richie Saunders, obviously. And even you throw in a Trevin Nell or a Dallin Hall, they've got guys you've kind of heard of at BYU for the last year or two, or this year at least. Kibikeda is a guy that nationally does not get respect or attention. He should. He is an impeccable big man inside. Great at rebounding the basketball. Great at offensive boards and putbacks. Keeps the ball high. He's a fundamental player. He'll be the difference maker.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Look, I am 24 years old. I don't know what I'm doing with my money. Monarch Money has fixed that. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did my money go? Between dining out and, entertainment, online shopping, easy to lose track. Monarch Money, that's where they come in. Personal CFO. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. So when I started Monarch Money, I realized how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I don't. And you can manage money with your partner. It's smooth and easy. Track shared and personal accounts, set goals, stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Go to monarchmoney.com. Check it out. This is something that TJ, I think last season was blowing up. Everybody wanted to talk about Florida State and Clemson. This year, it's been more of these rogue Twitter accounts or rogue podcasters or YouTubers just blowing hot air up everybody's skirts. And you and I have done our very best to break down these rumors in a way that's informational and gives people what they need to know moving forward. The latest edition of this, I was reading a tweet. I texted it to you. We decided, you know what? We got to talk about it. At Inside the Big 12 says Clemson and Florida State would need to notify the ACC they're leaving after the conclusion of the 2025-2026 season, and they will by August of 2025. So the claim here from our news breaking friend on Twitter is that Florida State and Clemson, by the end of this summer, will let the world know they are exiting the ACC and will be elsewhere after that 2025-2026 season, completely blowing out that 2030 deadline we originally had. Is this going to happen? Is Florida State going to leave the ACC in the next few months?
I would be pretty surprised, right? And I know Florida State fans, Clemson fans, kind of felt like, oh, it's a half win, right? It's a compromise, the literal definition of a compromise when we got the news on the 2030 kind of timeline being a little bit easier. Yeah. But I would be pretty surprised. I won't say that it's impossible. You can make a realignment projection today, and by tomorrow you're thinking something completely different because of how quick some of this stuff can move. I would be pretty surprised. It would surprise me if Florida State and Clemson had the appetite, like we've talked about how much it would cost, right? $75 million at the 2030 year time frame. You're going to have to add $18 million a year every year behind that. So if you leave 4 years earlier, what are you looking at? Essentially like another 80 million, 80 minus 8, so 72 million. You're talking about $147 million if my math's pretty good there, 150. I don't necessarily know that I see them having the appetite to do that. Does the SEC or does the Big Ten make a move with just 3-ish years to go on a media deal for the Big Ten, a few more for the SEC? I don't know what the appetite is for those conferences to do it. Now, are there some angles that would maybe be interesting with that? Would the Big Ten maybe pay up a couple of years early to keep FSU and Clemson from landing in the SEC? Or because that is what feels a little more natural, right? The ESPN is going to want to keep properties. And so whether the SEC wants it or not, would maybe Fox say like, hey, this is our chance to steal them? Maybe. I'm not saying that I completely buy that that's the case. Could Florida State and Clemson go in for a few years on a lessened deal, a half share or a 3/4 share like you've seen other teams do in the Big Ten, but it secures their future and also makes up some of the money that you're getting because of the playoff and other things that you kind of make up the difference of what you're making in the ACC? If you're Florida State and Clemson, the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten is big right now. But with the increased revenue sharing, it's not that much. You're talking like $10 to $15 million a year instead of the $40 million a year that you were probably looking at. And so if you're Florida State and Clemson, does it make sense to leave right now? Because you're talking about a gap that you're trying to close, but then you have to add $18 million a year on top of it to leave even earlier. So I don't know that it would make a ton of sense. Florida State in the middle of some building projects right now. I don't know that either one of them has $147 million to pony up tomorrow to leave before the 26 season. They have fully agreed that those are the numbers in question, and that is what they are going to pay if they leave. There's no lawsuit anymore to try and get that number down even lower. Now, do they have to pay that all at one time? Can they pay that over the course of, from now until 2036? I don't know the answer to that. I would lean toward no, but obviously as a Florida State guy, I hope this Twitter insider is right.
So the biggest question for me, I look at a BYU who comes from the mid-major ranks and goes to the Big 12. It's less of a jump from mid-major to from the ACC, I should say, to like the Big 10 of the SEC. It's not like jumping from mid-major to the Power 4, but it's still significant. $20 million plus a year when you do that. Is that investment enough to get Clemson and Florida State to pay up early on and say, hey, look, if we're getting 20, 25 million more per year, we're going to make this thing back up in 5, 6, 7, as you take into account your athletic revenue as well as your expenses, maybe 10 years. That's a 10-year investment I think I make.
Yeah, I think it literally just, to me, that side of it, the Florida State Clemson side is very easy. It is, here's how much money we will bring in. Here's how much money we would bring in. Here's our, here's the little bit of a cost to leave. Here's what we'll make in, you think about ticket sales. How much better does a Florida State Tennessee sell than a Florida State Wake? Right? How much better does a Florida State South Carolina sell than a Florida State Boston College? Right? Now, Florida State Clemson and Florida State Miami, and Florida State Virginia Tech, those are going to be high ticket dollar, ideas anyway. But yeah, I think that's kind of what you're looking at. How much better does a Florida State Nebraska sell than a Florida State Syracuse, right? So I think you're factoring all those things in. So on the Florida State Clemson side, it's a very easy math equation. Money in, money out, money cost, money spent, money delivered, right? That's easy. The other side of it is what's tougher. where do we go? Do we get a full share? Is the Big Ten and the SEC, are they willing to do something 3 or 4 years before we kind of thought that we would have a timeline of moving things around? Does the SEC see enough value? Does the Big Ten see enough value to do it early? Like, where's Florida State and Clemson going to go in the next 4 years? Like, they're not going to go independent for 3 years and then go on, because they're getting an unequal revenue sharing right now in the ACC. Does the unequal revenue sharing kind of, does it cut enough of that gap to where, does it cut enough of a gap to where it's worth it to maybe stick around for a couple of years and not have to pay an additional $18 million per season? I don't know. That's on Florida State and Clemson to try and figure out from a numbers side. The tough side is, where do they land? Who's willing to take them right now? Will they have a spot before 2030? And for Florida State and Clemson, again, their side's easy. The hard part to me is thinking that the Big Ten will do this 3 years early. I could see the Big Ten doing this a year early. I could see them saying, like, hey, we'll take you in 2029. That way the SEC can't get you. ESPN can't keep you, and we'll give you a little more stability. But I don't know that I could see them doing it in 4 years, because what leverage does Florida State and Clemson have to get in somewhere early anyway?
TJ, before I exonerate you from your own show, before I close your own show, it's 2032. You wake up in your bed, real snug, there's a rooster outside crowing, and Florida State is still in the ACC. What is your disappointment level? Because there's probably a Wake Forest fan listening saying, oh, these guys are only talking about Florida State, Clemson leaving. They could still stay. What is your disappointment level if it's 2032, you wake up and Florida State's still here?
I mean, I think it's pretty high. However, it's hard to know what factors went into that, right? It's hard to know what has happened since then. I'll tell you, if I've got my 2025 mind in 2032, it's pretty high. There's no doubt about it. Florida State has not liked the ACC for a long time, and it goes back a lot further than 2023 when they sued to leave. And so, yeah, the disappointment level is very, very high. That said, what does college football look like in totality at that point? And that's kind of the unanswered question that we don't know. What has changed? What has realigned? What has just been very different? Now, obviously, if Clemson's out and Georgia Tech's out and UNC's out and all these other teams are out, then yeah, it's going to be pretty insane. But has the ACC shifted? Has they changed? Have they just had an absolute, revitalization where Florida State, Clemson, and Miami and maybe one other program are consistently competing for titles, and the money has gone up and success has raised? I'm not anticipating that. I'm not expecting that. But if that's the case, then maybe you're looking at it a little bit differently. But yeah, I'd say that if all things kind of stay the course and we get to 2032 and something cataclysmic has not happened to, change our minds, I think there'd be a pretty big level of disappointment.
TJ, where can folks find more of your work? Yeah,
so if you're watching this on Drake's channel, over at College Football Addiction, if you're watching on College Football Addiction and you haven't hit the subscribe button already, make sure that you hit that button. What about you?
Before I close, everything that I want to double down on everything, pretty much everything you said here. I don't believe this will occur within the next year. It's something we can toss around and talk about the possibility of it, because if it does, it wouldn't be the most stunning thing that's happened in realignment and expansion. You could argue Texas and Oklahoma, or Stanford and Cal to the ACC. Those moves were even bigger than Florida State leaving, because we know they're already kind of teeing this thing up. So I'm not worried right now about this happening in the next 4 months, 5 months, us learning that, even in the next 2 years. But it's still very much a possibility, especially with donors at Florida State or Clemson feeling a little angsty toward the ACC or wanting to place themselves in the SEC or the Big Ten if that window feels as though it's closing, or either of those conferences put any pressure on the schools to make a decision. If in that scenario we see that, you got to have I sparked the pot? Here we go.
Yeah, we ain't going too fast. Florida State and Clemson here. This is free for both athletic departments, both marketing teams. If you're watching this, share this with your the hires up as your school and stuff. They should both start funds immediately, and it should just literally be the get out of the ACC fund. And if it gets to $75 million raised by 2030, that's when you're out. But if you get to $93 million by the year before, you can leave a year earlier. If you get to you what would that be? $115 million the year before, or $113 million the year before. We'll be out a couple of years earlier. Whatever you want to raise, whatever your fan base wants bad enough is what we can do. That's what they should do immediately. Those funds should already be in existence. It should literally be called the Get Out of the ACC Fund. And once you hit certain thresholds, if you raise 150 of it tomorrow, you're out tomorrow. See ya. And so, yeah, Florida State, Clemson folks listening, that should already have been done. But since you haven't started those funds yet, I'm giving you the free game. I won't even charge a royalty for you starting those.
At Drake Cetol, at LO Big 12 on Twitter, and wherever you find your podcast with Locked On Big 12. Thanks, TJ.
Appreciate you, man.